Sean Diddy Combs walked into the courtroom yesterday wearing a sweater over a white-collared shirt and gray slacks. He hugged his attorneys when he got in.
Has made Sean Combs a little bit nervous.
To me on that when you said, yeah, he looked like the gay homie. I didn't know what you were talking about.
No, I wouldn't go to... Do you think this might be too early?
Could be a life sentence. The sex trafficking is 15 years minimum, and the transportation for prostitution purposes is 10 years minimum. So various charges against him. The three main ones are racketeering, basically extortion, sex trafficking, and the transportation of people across state lines.
The courtroom fell into stunned silence as Usher took the stand and quietly stated, "He was 13, I was 13. A gasp rippled through the gallery when he confirmed being hospitalized after an encounter with Diddy. The judge ordered a recess as murmurs swelled and security moved toward Diddy's defense table. It's day 7 of the trial against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. But today marks a major shift. Usher Raymond IV, megastar singer and once a teenage prodigy under Diddy's wing, has taken the witness stand. His testimony not only confirms long-whispered industry rumors, but provides first-hand insight into alleged abuse, manipulation, and Diddy's infamous freak-off parties. Courtroom tensions peaked as new evidence was introduced. What began as a sex trafficking and racketeering case has now grown into a deeper exposé of a culture that was hidden in plain sight. Today, the Usher testimony may be the trial's most pivotal moment yet. In the towering halls of federal justice, the presence of Sean Diddy Combs carries a different weight now. No longer the swaggering icon of hip-hop enterprise, but the central figure in a criminal case that has cracked the surface of a culture long shielded by fame. His reputation once stood untouchable, polished by decades of record-breaking albums, fashion ventures, and corporate triumphs. But within the courtroom walls, all that polish begins to look like a mask, one now under full inspection by prosecutors, witnesses, and a jury instructed to ignore the man's legend and focus only on the allegations. These allegations are not lightweight. Federal prosecutors have accused Combs of running a coercive network, a deliberate machine of manipulation fueled by his immense wealth and influence. This isn't a single charge, nor a one-time incident. This is a 20-year web of intimidation, sex trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy. The prosecution alleges that what happened behind closed doors was not simply deviance, but a systematic exploitation of young artists and companions who were too vulnerable or too controlled to fight back. The names involved are well known, and the most recognizable among the accusers is Cassie Ventura. Once Diddy's partner in both music and personal life, Cassie filed a civil suit in 2023 that was quietly and swiftly settled. But this federal case reopens the darkest chapters, now with more force. She returns not as a civil complainant, but as the central witness in a criminal investigation. Prosecutors have referred to her as Victim 1 in internal filings, and her public testimony is expected to carry enormous weight with the jury. Alongside her are 3 others, Victim 2, Victim 3, and Victim 4, whose identities remain sealed for their protection. Each of their stories paints a similar picture: parties fueled by alcohol and drugs, pressure to perform acts they never consented to, and retaliation if they resisted. One of these victims is said to appear in footage retrieved by federal agents during the Homeland Security raids. That evidence, including the now notorious freak-off tapes, has already been ruled admissible despite Diddy's defense trying repeatedly to suppress it. These tapes, taken from security footage and digital backups found in his homes, reportedly contain graphic recordings of the events in question, visual documentation of what prosecutors claim were orchestrated group sex scenarios involving unwilling participants. Defense attorneys argue the footage was obtained illegally, manipulated, or taken out of context. The judge disagreed. The most unexpected voice to emerge in the case is that of Usher Raymond IV. Known to the world simply as Usher, he's a Grammy-winning artist with global acclaim. But what few understood until now is that his connection to Diddy runs far deeper than public collaboration. Usher, now 45, first entered Diddy's world as a 13-year-old boy. Back in the early 1990s, under the mentorship of L.A. Reid, Usher was sent to live with Combs for what was described as artist development, a concept that in hindsight has raised serious questions. Usher described it as flavor camp, a year-long arrangement where he lived inside Diddy's residence, attended parties, and was allegedly exposed to adult sexual environments well beyond any appropriate boundaries. For decades, Usher stayed quiet. Interviews suggested something was off, but he never directly named the experiences until now. His subpoena to testify comes as a shock to some, but to those familiar with industry whispers, it was long overdue. The court believes he may be both a witness and a former victim, someone who saw, endured, and possibly enabled elements of Diddy's alleged operations. The timeline is chilling. From 1993 to 1995, Usher lived with Diddy, attending parties where the lines between mentorship and manipulation reportedly blurred. In the early 2000s, Cassie emerged in Diddy's public life. In 2009, Usher himself faced civil allegations related to an STD case, a lawsuit that would later be settled quietly, but raised questions about his early influences and possible trauma. Between 2009 and 2018, accusations against Diddy grew in frequency and tone. Some were silenced with NDAs. Others, like Cassie's, eventually surfaced in public litigation. By 2023, the federal government had begun its own investigation. It escalated quickly. Raids on Diddy's LA and Miami homes uncovered digital evidence that fast-tracked a grand jury indictment. Prosecutors say the material seized not only validated the victim accounts, they say it broadened the scope of the case. What was once thought to be limited to a few individuals may span across continents, with hundreds of pages of international contacts, emails, encrypted messages, and financial records now under review. As of 2025, the criminal trial is underway. This is not merely a celebrity scandal. It is a federal RICO trial with implications for the entire music industry. Usher's appearance on Day 7 is being called a watershed moment by reporters seated in the courtroom. He has knowledge that predates all other testimonies. He lived inside the system being exposed. And now, under oath, he's prepared to unravel what may become one of the most consequential chapters in modern entertainment law. Media presence around the courthouse has swelled to overwhelming levels. News crews from CNN, NBC, Rolling Stone, and countless online platforms line the steps of the Southern District of New York. The narrative they're chasing is no longer just about Diddy, it's about who knew what and when. It's about how a machine that operated in luxury and secrecy for over 2 decades finally met the raw scrutiny of the law. And most of all, it's about whether the stories whispered for years in recording studios, backstage halls, and penthouse suites will now, at last, be heard in full, beneath the fluorescent glare of courtroom lights. The courtroom on Day 7 carried an energy that words could barely contain. It was more than anticipation. It was the kind of charged silence that only falls when something irreversible is about to happen. Every seat in the gallery was filled well before the judge's arrival. Court officers had expanded the press zone to accommodate the swarm of credentialed media now covering what was fast becoming one of the most closely followed trials in recent memory. Outside, the Southern District of New York courthouse looked like the site of a film premiere. Only here, the stakes were real, and the cameras weren't rolling for fiction. Security had tightened significantly since the prior day's session. Marshals stood not just at their usual stations near the doorways and jury box, but also in both aisles. 2 more plainclothes agents had been positioned near the defense table, a signal that court officials were anticipating possible escalation. One officer's hand rested loosely on his holstered sidearm, his gaze locked not on the press or the jury, but squarely on the defense's lead chair, where Sean Diddy Combs sat motionless, head slightly bowed. Judge Aaron Subramanian made his entrance precisely at 9:01 a.m. Wearing a crisp black robe and a look of controlled determination, he wasted no time acknowledging a pre-submitted request from the defense. A sidebar commenced immediately over the projected introduction of what were termed media-sensitive exhibits, believed by many to be video footage featuring graphic or compromising content. The judge didn't publicly confirm the nature of the evidence, but granted a short recess after the sidebar, allowing the legal teams to confer privately. By the time court reconvened, a low murmur had swept the room, audible even through the soundproofed glass barrier separating the press from the rest of the gallery. The buzz grew when, at 10:17 a.m., Usher Raymond IV stepped through the left witness entrance. A bailiff flanked him on either side. Dressed in a tailored navy suit with a muted tie, Usher carried himself with the controlled poise of someone fully aware that this moment would live far beyond the courtroom. He paused just inside the chamber, eyes sweeping briefly over the crowd, the judge, and finally locking only for a second on Diddy himself. Combs didn't react. He didn't nod, didn't flinch. His hands remained clasped together on the table, eyes forward, lips tight. Whether he was bracing for impact or simply refusing to acknowledge his former protege was anyone's guess. Usher approached the witness stand slowly, methodically, the sound of his shoes against the polished floor almost rhythmic. As the bailiff administered the oath, he lifted his right hand without hesitation. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God?" the clerk asked. "I do," Usher said. There was no tremble in his voice. 10 women and 2 men comprised the jury. Each leaned forward in unison, as though reacting to a sudden drop in barometric pressure. Several clutched their notepads. One woman on the far right kept glancing between Usher and Diddy, as if trying to reconcile the smiling public personas she once knew with the people now seated in this sterile, stark legal theater. As the prosecution began, the court clerk confirmed what had been speculated all morning. Video exhibits labeled Exhibit 81A through 81C were cleared for use later that day. These were rumored to be linked directly to the controversial freak-off parties, events that until recently had only existed in whispers and internet speculation. Today, they were poised to become evidence. Usher's presence on the stand was more than symbolic. It was personal history laid bare, stripped of the fame and filtered interviews that had previously shaped his public narrative. From the press box, Rolling Stone's senior court correspondent scribbled furiously as whispers confirmed the admission of 2 new anonymous witnesses. Emergency protective orders had been granted the night before. Their identities would remain sealed, but their statements were set to be read into the record by prosecutors within the week. Outside, the courthouse perimeter resembled a temporary media fortress. Reporters from TMZ, Complex, CNN, and the BBC filed live updates every half hour. Pedestrian barricades had been extended twice by noon. Protesters stood across the street, some holding signs reading "Protect Black Survivors," while others waved placards decrying a media conspiracy against a Black-owned empire. The national conversation was fracturing. Back inside, the courtroom's emotional temperature dropped with each passing second. Usher's eyes remained focused, not on Diddy, not on the press, but somewhere distant. He hadn't begun speaking in detail yet, but the weight of his presence already felt like testimony. The air in the room had thickened. Attorneys on both sides were exchanging muted words over the bench. The defense looked tense. Lead attorney Mark Agnifilo had pulled a stack of legal pads from his briefcase, flipping through notes and whispering to his second chair. 2 seats down, another lawyer rubbed his temple and glanced toward the gallery, as if gauging the mood outside their immediate legal bubble. Judge Subramanian looked directly at Usher. "Mr. Raymond," he said, his tone measured, "you may begin." At that moment, all background noise, foot shuffles, pen scratches, the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed to vanish. The courtroom had reached a collective stillness. It wasn't just that people wanted to hear what Usher had to say, they needed to hear it. What followed would not only shake the room, but become one of the defining narratives of the trial. But in this suspended moment, before the first sentence dropped, all anyone could feel was the calm before the storm. Usher sat upright on the witness stand, his frame steady, his expression unreadable, though the flicker in his eyes gave away more than words might have. He wasn't here to perform. This wasn't a concert. This was sworn testimony, raw, unrehearsed, and tethered to a part of his life the public had only ever seen through controlled interviews and red carpet appearances. "I was 13, he began, when I was sent to live with Sean Combs." The words fell quietly but carried the full weight of decades. It was presented to me as training, artist development. I believed it. There was a brief moment where no one moved. Even the stenographer, who had already begun typing with mechanical speed, paused her fingers for a split second. In that instant, a global superstar transformed into a child again. One who'd once stepped into the penthouse of a music mogul with stars in his eyes and no understanding of the world he was about to be ushered into. He went on to describe what Diddy called flavor camp, That's what it was. No schedule, no bedtime, no real supervision. No one but Sean, he said, voice measured, eyes forward. He made the rules. He controlled everything. My schedule, my clothes, even who I was allowed to talk to. The prosecution let him speak in his rhythm. This wasn't a story that needed dramatizing. The plain facts were damning enough. Usher explained how he'd gone from sleeping in his mother's house to sleeping in a Manhattan penthouse that rarely knew silence. At night, there were always people, he said. Women, drugs, some guys I didn't recognize. There were cameras, on shelves, in corners. Some pointed at couches. I didn't understand what I was looking at. His tone was reflective but unwavering. Each detail added texture to a narrative that had long been relegated to rumor. But now, under oath, it became legal truth. At one point, a juror, a woman in her 50s, seated closest to the prosecution, reached up and gently covered her mouth, as if the taste of the story itself had turned bitter. "Did you ever feel unsafe?" the prosecutor asked. Usher tilted his head slightly before responding. "I didn't know what safe looked like. I thought that's how the business worked. I thought this was what success required." He recounted his first week at Diddy's home. "He'd wake me up at 2 a.m. and tell me we were going to a club," he said. "I wasn't even old enough to get inside, but with him, no one asked questions." Usher detailed how he'd stand against velvet ropes while Diddy disappeared into VIP rooms. Sometimes he'd come back and say things I didn't understand. Sometimes he wouldn't come back at all. When asked if anyone tried to intervene, managers, label executives, mentors, Usher shook his head. Nobody stepped in. They called it a rite of passage. L.A. Reid told my mom it was a chance to learn the lifestyle. That's how they phrased it, like a reward. The courtroom was silent, except for the tapping of keys from multiple reporters trying to capture his every word. A legal affairs correspondent for CNN described the room as airless. Then came the question everyone was waiting for. "Mr. Raymond, did anything happen to you physically during your time at Mr. Combs's residence?" There was a long pause. The kind of pause that swells like a wave just before crashing. "I was hospitalized once," he said slowly. "It wasn't from a fall. I'll leave it there." The words landed with devastating clarity. No theatrics. Just fact. A hush spread across the courtroom like fog. Even the judge, usually composed behind his elevated bench, blinked slowly, absorbing what had just been said. One of Diddy's attorneys leaned forward, whispering something into the lead counsel's ear. Diddy, for his part, remained still, arms crossed, staring forward without blinking. The prosecutor did not push for more detail. She knew the silence was more powerful than a full sentence. She pivoted instead. "What was your relationship like with Mr. Combs after that incident?" Usher exhaled. "He started giving me things. Shoes, watches, a chain. He'd say things like, 'You're my little brother. You're my family now.' I didn't know how to process it. Part of me felt special. Part of me felt trapped." That word hung in the air. Trapped. It didn't match the image of the Usher fans grew up with. The polished, confident singer with moves and melodies that defined a generation. But now, the truth was unmasking that legacy. Underneath the success was a teenager navigating power, manipulation, and trauma he had no tools to name at the time. The testimony continued. He explained how music became his only safe space. "The studio was where I felt in control. I'd beg to be there instead of out with him. But even in the studio, he'd come in, unannounced, say things, bring people." Usher described being told he was too soft if he resisted. He'd say things like, "You'll never be big if you don't loosen up." So I tried to play along. Laugh when they laughed, nod when they nodded. At one point, he looked directly at the jury. "It took me years to understand what I was part of." He explained that even after leaving Diddy's home, the relationship didn't fully sever. He still had influence over my image, my projects, my endorsements. There were contracts I didn't understand. Appearances I was told to do. Every time I tried to pull away, there'd be a call, a favor, a reminder of what I owed. When asked about the people around Diddy, his inner circle, Usher said many of them were also victims in one form or another. It was a system, You were either loyal or you were out. And if you were out, you were done. Blacklisted. The prosecutor gently pivoted again. Did you ever discuss what happened with anyone before now? Usher's answer came quickly. I tried. A few times. But people would say, don't rock the boat. Think of your career. Let it go. So I let it go. Until now. As he finished that sentence, a few seats down, a reporter from the New York Times typed a headline that would hit their site within minutes. Usher breaks silence on Diddy. Reveals hospitalization in courtroom testimony. Back on the stand, Usher sat quietly as the prosecutor collected her notes. The first phase of questioning was done, but the trial was far from over. What had started as calm recollection had become something far more. An unmasking of memory, control, and the industry's deep complicity. And in that courtroom, in front of a jury and a silent audience, the story of a 13-year-old boy's lost innocence had just become part of the public record. The courtroom fell into a tense silence as the prosecution carefully introduced what they called Exhibit 81A, an old iPhone recording dating all the way back to 2005. The grainy footage flickered onto the large screen, capturing a scene frozen in time. There, a teenage Usher sat quietly beside Sean Diddy Combs at a lively party. The atmosphere buzzed with the sounds of laughter and chatter, but in one corner of the room, a woman's quiet sobs pierced through the background noise, drawing a stark contrast to the festive setting. As the camera slowly panned away, the scene shifted to a different room. The view was blurred but unmistakable. Multiple people engaged in what the prosecution described as a disturbing sex act. Usher's figure remained still and composed in the frame, his eyes cast downward, avoiding any direct gaze or interaction with what was unfolding around him. The stillness of his posture spoke volumes, his silence echoing louder than any words. The prosecutor leaned forward, locking eyes with Usher. Did you witness this live? The question was direct, pressing. Usher's nod was steady, almost resigned. Yes. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Why didn't you leave? Came the next question, gentle but firm. Usher's voice was soft but clear. I didn't have anywhere else to go. At this point, the defense attorneys quickly rose, raising objections one after another, hoping to block the damaging footage and testimony, but the judge was unwavering, overruling every attempt. Then came Exhibit 81B, another piece of evidence, this time a clip from a live stream. The video showed Diddy himself casually saying, "We used to wake up together, me and Usher, back when he was 10. The courtroom buzzed with whispered reactions, a ripple of shock and disbelief spreading among the spectators. Usher confirmed the voice on the screen was indeed Diddy's. That was me, he said quietly, his expression darkening. That was the kind of language he used publicly. Imagine what it was like behind closed doors. One juror, unable to bear the weight of the moment, slowly turned away, eyes fixed elsewhere, trying to process the heavy truth that hung in the air. As Usher began to lay bare his experience, describing the relentless torment he endured, what he called psychological warfare, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier with each word. The tension was almost palpable, and all eyes turned toward the defendant, Sean Diddy Combs. His posture, previously composed and reserved, began to subtly shift. The man who had sat stoically through the evidence now leaned in closer toward his attorney, Mark Agnifilo, whispering urgently. His head shook, a barely concealed frustration and disbelief crossing his face. Then, in a moment that shocked the entire courtroom, Diddy suddenly rose from his seat. The room fell into an immediate hush, broken only by his loud, defiant voice. "None of this is true!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the room, ringing with anger and denial. The judge's gavel came down hard and fast, demanding silence. "Mr. Combs, one more outburst and I will have you removed from this courtroom," the judge warned sternly. Security personnel, poised just a few feet away, instinctively took a step forward, ready to act if necessary. Diddy sat back down, his jaw clenched tightly, eyes narrowing as if burning holes through the prosecution. His entire demeanor radiated defiance and simmering rage. Meanwhile, Usher remained calm and collected. He did not flinch or show any sign of intimidation in response to the outburst. His gaze was steady, his voice unwavering. The courtroom held its breath, caught between the explosive moment and the quiet tension that followed. After a brief recess to allow tempers to cool, the proceedings resumed. Usher returned to the stand, his testimony continuing with a chilling final statement that left a heavy silence in its wake. "I wasn't just a witness," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "I was a blueprint." And he knew exactly what he was doing. The weight of those words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the gravity of the case and the deep wounds beneath the surface. Later that day, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted once again. The prosecution called an unexpected witness to the stand, a former assistant who went by the name Monica A. Her true identity was kept confidential, sealed away for her protection, but the details of her story were soon laid bare. Monica had worked closely within the walls of Diddy's lavish home during the years between 2003 and 2007, a time that overlapped directly with the troubling events the court was examining. As she took the oath and faced the courtroom, Monica's voice was steady but laced with a quiet tension. She confirmed much of what Usher had described, painting a grim picture of what went on behind closed doors. "I saw him come out of that room once," Monica revealed, her eyes fixed on the judge. "He was bleeding. We weren't allowed to ask questions." The weight of her words hung heavy in the room. The idea that such incidents were hidden and enforced by silence struck a chord with everyone present. To support her testimony, the prosecution introduced photographs of Monica's old notebooks, which were entered into evidence as Exhibit 81D. These weren't just ordinary notes. They were personal journal entries, raw and revealing. One particular entry stood out, its words etched in black ink. "Usher locked in studio for 36 hours. Screamed at night. Nobody opened the door." The haunting image of a young man trapped and unheard resonated deeply. The defense attorneys immediately objected, sparking a heated sidebar with the judge. The tension was thick as voices were hushed, and the judge carefully weighed the arguments. Ultimately, the judge ruled to allow the evidence, reinforcing the prosecution's case. Outside the courtroom, CNN reported that independent experts had authenticated the videos presented as evidence, confirming their legitimacy. This external validation added another layer of weight to the proceedings. As the day's session drew to a close, the prosecution delivered a powerful statement that echoed through the chamber. "This isn't about regret. This is about survival." The simple yet profound declaration underscored the gravity of the case. This was not merely a story of past mistakes, but a battle for truth and endurance. The courtroom was still settling after Monica A's testimony when the atmosphere suddenly shifted. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted in a violent outburst from Sean "Diddy" Combs himself. As Monica stepped down from the stand, Diddy, who had remained mostly silent and composed until that point, suddenly lost control. With a sharp, abrupt motion, he stood up from his chair, his face flushed with anger. His hand came crashing down hard on the defense table, echoing loudly through the hushed courtroom. The shock was immediate, eyes snapping toward him in disbelief. "You're all liars? This is a setup!" he shouted, his voice raw and fierce, cutting through the silence like a thunderclap. Judge Subramanian's expression hardened instantly. There was no tolerance for such disruption in his courtroom. He slammed his gavel decisively and ordered court officers forward. "Mr. Combs, you are held in contempt. Court will recess," the judge declared firmly. Two officers moved quickly, gently but firmly escorting Diddy toward the exit. As he was led away, the media cameras swarmed, capturing every moment. Reporters caught him muttering under his breath, a bitter and defiant line that seemed to drip with frustration. "You think they care about truth? This is a takedown?" Back at the defense table, the scene was chaotic in a quieter way. His legal team scrambled to regain control. One lawyer hurriedly passed a note to a colleague, while another leaned forward, dropping her head into her hands in visible despair. From the spectator gallery, an unexpected silence filled the space where family and friends might have risen to support him. No one stood up to follow Diddy out of the courtroom. The absence was deafening, a stark contrast to the public image of power and influence he usually commanded. For the first time, those gathered saw not the confident mogul, the larger-than-life figure commanding rooms with charisma and control. Instead, they witnessed a defendant unraveling in real time, exposed, vulnerable, and overwhelmed under the relentless pressure of the courtroom spotlight. The tension lingered in the air as the judge called for a recess, the day's dramatic events leaving a heavy weight on everyone present. At precisely 4:45 p.m., after a day filled with tension, revelations, and dramatic moments, Judge Subramanian brought the courtroom to a close. His voice was calm but firm as he announced, "Court is adjourned." The gavel's sharp rap echoed through the chamber, signaling a temporary pause in the legal battle unfolding within these walls. Usher rose from the witness stand quietly, his expression unreadable. Without casting a glance backward, he stepped down, leaving behind a courtroom still buzzing with the impact of his testimony. There was a resolute finality in his movement, as if, for him, the most difficult part of the day was over. In stark contrast, Sean "Diddy" Combs had not returned to the courtroom. His absence was deeply felt. The defense team packed up their belongings with subdued haste, filing out in near silence. No words were exchanged, no attempts to explain or justify the earlier outburst. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse, eager to capture every detail. Within minutes, the story exploded across national news outlets. CNN led with a headline that captured the drama succinctly. Usher names names, Diddy explodes. The image of a courtroom divided, emotions running high, was seared into the public consciousness. Rolling Stone offered the more poetic take, dubbing it "the day silence cracked." The phrase spoke to the breaking of a long-held secrecy, the shattering of silence that had protected so much darkness. Meanwhile, none of Diddy's family members were seen exiting alongside his legal team. The absence of visible support only fueled speculation and rumors. Within the hour, whispers of additional witness subpoenas began to circulate among court watchers and journalists alike, hinting that the case was far from over. The jurors, who had remained stoic throughout the day, were visibly affected as they were escorted from the courtroom. Their faces carried the weight of what they had witnessed, reflecting the gravity of the case and the difficult decisions ahead. As the courtroom emptied, a quiet tension remained in the air, an unspoken promise of more to come. The trial was set to resume the very next day. More evidence was expected, including tapes seized from Diddy's Miami residence, promising to deepen the revelations and raise the stakes even higher. The courtroom would be ready, and so would everyone watching, waiting for the next chapter to unfold.